What's up, everyone? Today I am going to revisit this maple that was an air layer off of another tree that I separated this past spring. So what I want to do is I want to take this out of the container and check the roots to see how things have progressed since I separated the air layer. And if you're asking yourself or saying to yourself, wait a minute, it's not actually repotting time right now, it's December and you need to wait, then you are probably thinking correctly. But here's the deal. In San Francisco, we don't get freezing temperatures, and so the repotting window is different than it might be in your local climate. You should always repot, or at least as a beginner, repot during your repotting window, which you can determine based on when temperate climate trees are dormant, and if you're unsure when they're dormant, and when it's safe to repot, you should check with people who are local to you or other resources to make sure that you understand the criteria. All right, with that scraped out, I've gotten myself down to what is most of the actual upper roots on the air layer. But in order to make sure that I can see what I'm doing, I'm actually going to go ahead and wash this off so that I can further separate out any kind of dark spots in here where there looks like there should be roots, but maybe there aren't. And this in particular, there's like a bulge on this side, but no roots coming out. And it's all bumpy looking, which looks like callus tissue, but I actually don't see any roots coming straight out of that section. So washing it off is going to make a little bit of a mess, but it's also going to help me understand a little bit better what's going on here. All right, washed off and a little bit more excavation done. So as I had pointed out, there are no roots coming out of this section right here. So I'm going to go ahead and just use a knife to kind of re-wound this, removing the callus below here and leaving this upper section to kind of create that taper in the nebari. Essentially what this is doing is this line across here does exactly the same thing that the original air layer did, which is to stop the flow of the photosynthesis coming down from above at this point, which makes the tree pool resources there and make it more likely that it will issue roots from that point. Now, if it doesn't work, this whole section of the nebari could end up dying, but I'm hoping that that doesn't happen. So in other places where there are roots coming out, what I'm going to do here is kind of analyze what level the roots are at and determine whether there are roots stacked on top of each other. Ideally, I want to have all of the roots coming out at about the same level. And it looks like to me that this level right here is just about ideal, which is why I scored that over there. So I'm coming around. Now in this section we have a pretty good number of roots, but they're kind of stacked on top of each other. So I will actually want to move this downward if I can. So taking off that high root in favor of the one below it. Same thing here. All right, decided I'm just going to go for it here and do a full-on repot. There's a lot of good healthy roots, but there's some roots in here that appear to have not be as healthy, so I want to get those out, and also want to put this in a slightly shallower, wider container to help with the nebari development. Okay, so it took me a little while, but I finally got all that soil out. And if we look at the underside, there's a little bit more of a mess here than what I was hoping for. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a combination of setting the angle, in other words, which angle produces the best nebari. And I think that about this orientation, which is what I had potted it at, does. And that means that I can go ahead and cut off a bunch of this wood below where I scored the bark right here. All right, so I keep checking the angle here as I'm trimming underneath because I'm going to go ahead and attach this to a piece of plywood. So if I flip it over here, you can see where the air layer, the original branch was right here, and then all the callus tissue around that has formed new wood and callus tissue. So I've got this relatively flat, and I'm going to basically sit that right on a board so that all the roots that come out have to go sideways rather than down. I've got a piece of plywood here, and I've already pre-drilled a little bit of an oversized hole, and I've got a stainless steel screw here. I'm going to attach it by sinking the stainless steel screw straight into the wood on the underside of what was the branch. The screw I used was only probably 1/4 of an inch longer than the thickness of this piece of plywood, and that's because I don't want to split any of the wood in here, but this gives you an idea of where I'm headed. Now, I need to make sure that I got the angle at least reasonably close to what I was aiming for. There we go. All right, so up to this point, I haven't even talked about the trunk on the tree or anything like that. All I've been doing is looking at the nebari, thinking about the repotting and the base, and trying to get an even root distribution. So with it attached to this board and nestling it into this large Anderson flat, I know that I'm going to get some good, nice running roots and a lot of really vigorous growth from the top. Now, none of these trunks are really as interesting as I want them to be, but with this particular project, what I've decided is that I'm really focused on creating a good nebari. And once I have a good nebari going, I can then come back and essentially create a trunk. So it could be a Kabudachi style, but none of these trunks really go together really well. Kabudachi being a clump style with a fused base that's popular in terms, or in Japan in terms of like maples. What I'm likely to do actually is to allow these to grow out through the spring, get the roots reestablished, and then come back in and cut one or more of them off. The other ones, so say I cut this one off first, the other ones will then continue to form wood and heal over that scar. So maybe in the end, I'll end up using this center one as the trunk, but meanwhile, all of them are going to contribute to the nebari development, and I can come back and create the trunk a little bit later. I'm going to use a little bit of this fine akadama based soil right here around the base so that I don't have to come back and pull it out later. And I do find that the akadama soil tends to create a little bit finer root structure than the perlite mixture that I'm using, and that's exactly what it's supposed to be doing, because with the perlite mixture I want the roots to run, whereas with the akadama mixture I want the roots to divide. In growing, I want running, vigorous roots, and in refinement I want dividing roots and dividing branches. So this is still very much a growing project, but I'm going to see if this hybrid technique will continue my root development any better than just using regular perlite and cocoa and bark. Now, as I mentioned at the beginning of the video, I now need to protect this from sub-freezing temperatures, and that's not going to be a problem locally. But if you are in a location where you get freezing temperatures, you will want to do this type of operation in spring rather than in middle winter. I might end up putting this in the greenhouse to just give it a jump start. That might end up causing it to leaf out, but it won't really matter because I've done the important work for this winter. That wraps up this crazy maple repot. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.